Hi everybody, I'm Beth Wangler and today is the 1-year birthday of The Lake of Living Water. The Lake of Living Water is the first story at all in the Firstborn's Legacy saga. Here is the cover, so you can see. This short story, again, came out a year ago and I'm still very proud of it. It is a retelling of the story of creation and of the Garden of Eden with the fall. So let me go ahead and read the synopsis of it for you so you guys can know a bit more about it if you haven't already read it. Life is perfect. Life is good. At least, that's all Narda has ever known. He and his siblings embark on their greatest adventure yet. They plan to climb the tallest mountain into the heavens, where they can sing with the stars. On the way, Narda discovers marvels he never dreamed of. Then he encounters something better and worse than his wildest dreams. Set in the world of the Firstborn's Legacy series, this Christian fantasy short story mixes the biblical story of the fall with dragons and talking animals. It is a story of discovery, loss, and hope, and it is the prequel to my novel Child of the Cates. So I asked a lot of people on Twitter how they'd like us to celebrate this book's birthday, and the consensus was to celebrate with a Q&A video. So thank you to Caitlin Buxton, J.E. Perazzi, Beth Dawson, KL Plus Pierce, and the Phoenix Fiction Writers for your amazing questions. I'm really thankful for you all. So here we go. I arranged these questions to first be the ones that are focused just on the Lake of Living Waters, and then gradually transition to ones that are about the Firstborn's Legacy as a whole. So our first question is, what made you choose to write The Lake of Living Waters as if the narrator was telling you the story themselves? When I was starting to write the story, I knew that I wanted it to be a different point of view from Child of the Cates. Throughout the Firstborn's Legacy saga, there's going to be a lot of stories that don't always have a first-person present tense narrator. So I wanted to introduce that right off the bat. And then as I was trying to figure out which point of view to use, having this narrator, having Narda tell the story to his grandchildren felt most natural for it. I think part of that could also be that because he's telling it later in life, he's able to add in more suspense, more hints at what's going to go wrong, whereas when he is in the story, he doesn't quite see that coming at all. Number 2, what was your favorite aspect of the paradise you envisioned when you wrote this? My favorite aspect was Aya's presence, or God's presence. I loved imagining what it would be like to have such a close relationship with the Creator, to be able to walk with him and have him show up sometimes when you're hanging out in the meadow with your siblings and a talking deer. That just seemed really cool. Question 3. What was the hardest part about writing The Lake of Living Water? By far the hardest part was writing it was that there isn't much conflict in it. Most stories thrive on conflict. Pretty much all writing advice tells you your story needs conflict, and that's what drives a story forward. But in a perfect world, with people who haven't made mistakes yet, that's not part of the story. So I had to really lean into the more creative aspect of it and focus more on what new things can I imagine, new beautiful experiences for them to keep the story going forward as the narrator is inserting some hints that things might not last as well forever. Question number 4. Aside from the one, winky face, will we see any of these characters again in other stories? So I'm not quite sure which one you're referring to. I think it's either Aya or Narda. Most might answer spoilers. You might. I am hoping to someday write Rebelleon's record. So in Child of the Cates, the main character, Rebelleon, is a historian, and she's written out the full history of the people of Morea. I'd love to write that someday. I'm just not sure quite when that will happen. And in that case, you'll get another version of the Lake of Living Water as it fits in the larger narrative from Ray's perspective. And it's not a spoiler at all to say yes, you will see Aya again. Well, he hasn't been physically seen yet. He has shown up in Aurelia the Nightwalker. So there's that. Question number 5 is kind of a combination of several questions. If you could live anywhere in the Firstborn's Legacy universe, where would you live? Who would be your animal companion? And what would be your occupation? This is a great question, and I'm going to assume that Elcidon is out of the question now that creation has been torn. I'd like to live in a certain place in book 3 that is currently a spoiler. I'd like to live in that place from the end of book 3, which is going to be called The King's Son, for the several decades following the end of book 3. I'm really excited for that place. I love it. It has a lot of my favorite things, and I get to put a lot of imagination in it, but I can't tell you right now what it is. But in living there, my animal companions, I would of course have a raccoon, a talking raccoon bestie. Raccoons are my favorite animals. I think they're super cute, and one that is talking would just be a blast to hang out with. But I'd also be friends with wolves, with hedgehogs, probably with pretty much all the animals. I am a big animal lover. And for my occupation, I would probably be a writer there as well. Might look more like a historian, like Rebelleon was, or I might write fairy stories or something creative like that. Question number 6. Who is your favorite character to write? Rebelleon in Child of the Cates was really fun to write. We have a lot in common, and I spent 6 years with her, so I knew her really well. I love her contemplative nature. I love her view on the world. Yeah, it was nice spending time with her. By the end of those 6 years, she was like a good friend, even though I made her up. And then in the Temple Builders, it was really fun. Not the Temple Builders, in Cadam Chieftain, it was really fun to revisit her later from a different perspective and see how her choice in life and the path she was following would have changed her and kept her growing. Narda is always wonderful to have in a story. I love him. He has such a different perspective on the world, and I love the puzzle of trying to figure out if I had his experiences and all of the many, many experiences he has had, how would I view the world? How would he react in different situations? And he reacts very differently than anybody else because he is very, very unique. And then Aurelia, the Nightwalker from Aurelia the Nightwalker. I loved writing her. I loved her perspective as someone who's kind of a pariah among her people, but wants so badly to live up to what they expect of her and to please her family, especially her sister. Yeah, Aurelia was wonderful to write. I wish I had more time with her. Question number 7. What have you learned from writing your steward stories? Well, I mostly haven't written short stories before, aside from The Lake of Living Water and then The Word Thrower, which was in the Phoenix Fiction Writer Anti-Heroes Anthology this past fall. I've pretty much only written novels before. I always have a lot in my head. I know a lot about the backstories of the characters and how they fit into the larger world, and there's a lot of the culture and the history there. Short stories have to be really focused, and that is difficult for me. I keep trying to say, well, I'll just do like quick dive into this scene, and then this scene from 10 years later in these short stories, but it doesn't work. So that is something I'm really learning. And I'm also learning that it's best to write what scares me. The themes in my stories and the struggles that my characters have are all rooted in something that I've gone through or something I see in myself or the people that I care about. And those can be really hard things to be honest about. Most of the time, there are things I don't really like thinking about, things I try to just brush under the rug. But the stories call for these issues to be examined. And so clearly there's a large layer of fantasy put over it with talking animals and different worlds. But I think the biggest, most important thing I've learned is that I need to be honest about life and honest about the hard things and honest about the hard things that I feel myself and the things that I usually try to hide from. And then question number 8. Which Firstborn's legacy story are you most afraid to write, and why? Oh, also this is the last question. Just a forewarning. I'm intimidated by book 2, The Steward's Apprentice. Years ago, I wrote a first draft of it, and I know the characters really, really well and love them, but the plot is a mess, and I'm more of a, what E.B. Dawson calls a trailblazer, as opposed to a plotter. I know that I need to rewrite it, and I know I need to figure out how to have a solid plot and arc throughout the story. But whenever I sit down and think about that, my brain just goes, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know. I know these characters. I don't know what to have them do yet. So I'm sure by the time I'm finished with writing the Steward stories, I'll know a bit more with that. But right now, it just feels a bit scary. But I'm also scared to write book 5, which currently does not have a set title. Book 5 is the Jesus story in the series, and I don't have the skill to write that well yet, and I don't know if I ever will, but when we get to that point, I'm just gonna have to do the best I can. So thinking about trying to honor such an important person, to portray God in human form well, is a very intimidating thought. But I do love that story, and I am excited to write it even if it scares me, which goes along with what I was saying with the Steward stories, of learning that I need to write what scares me. So yeah, those are my answers to your guys' questions. Thank you so much for sending them in. If you have more questions, let me know down in the comments section. I'd love to talk with you more about these stories, about your favorite Bible stories, your favorite fantasy stories, about any questions you have. Um, if you enjoyed this video, please go ahead and leave a like. And on my channel right now, you can find read-alouds of the Weaver's Blessing, this fairy tale up here. Every month I read a few chapters aloud from that. So yeah, thank you for celebrating with me, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of this day, which is the Lake of Living Water's first birthday. Thank you guys. Bye.